Single dad CEO accidentally hires wrong tutor for his daughter, discover she's woman of his dream. Hi, my beautiful family. I speak to you today with a heart full of love, but also with truth. Our channel is built on your strength, your love, and your support. Every story I write is written with tears, with passion, and with prayer for each one of you. But my family, I see the channel going down because many forget to like, many forget to comment. It hurts me because it feels like my hard work is left unseen. I ask you today, not just as a creator, but as your brother who truly loves you, please, whenever you watch, give your love back. A simple like, a simple comment keeps this family alive, keeps our light shining, and gives me the power to bring you more and more beautiful stories. May God bless every woman in this family with honor, with dignity, and with unshakable strength. May every man be blessed with wisdom and respect. May our children rise higher than mountains. And may every home be filled with endless love and peace. Amen. If your heart is true, write present. If your love is real, write in the comment where you're watching from. You know, most CEOs will tell you they've got everything under control. Numbers, schedules, entire companies bending to their will. But here's the thing about control: it only takes one wrong decision to unravel the whole illusion. For this man, that decision came wrapped in something deceptively small, or one name mixed up, one quick yes without double checking, and suddenly the fortress he'd spent years building, his polished career, his guarded reputation, even the delicate balance of his family was about to be shaken to its foundation. At first, it seemed like nothing, just a new tutor for his daughter, another employee added to the long list of people he paid to keep life running smoothly. But this wasn't the hire he expected. No Ivy League credentials, no stiff professionalism. Instead, she walked in with a quiet kind of fire in her eyes, the sort of presence you don't plan for, but can't ignore. And his daughter, she adored her instantly. Sounds like a blessing, right? A father desperate to see his little girl smile again finally gets some relief. Except, blessings can feel a lot like bombs when you've spent your whole life protecting an image, because not everyone around him was happy. Board members whispered. His sister raised eyebrows, and the ghost of his ex-wife, still circling his life, wasn't about to let some stranger waltz in and win hearts that weren't hers anymore. Behind every smile, behind every polite conversation, something darker was brewing. See? The problem with falling for the wrong person isn't the falling. It's the fallout, the subtle sabotage, the whispered lies that spread faster than the truth ever could. The way power shifts when love dares to exist where it isn't supposed to. And that's exactly what this story is about. Not just an office romance. Not just a single dad finding hope in the unlikeliest place. No, this is a story of betrayal, manipulation, and revenge. Of people who thought they could play with someone's life and get away with it. But before the reckoning came the heartbreak, the rage, the slow, cold justice. There was this moment. The moment he realized the life he'd controlled so tightly was slipping right through his fingers. All because of one accidental hire. So buckle up. Because this isn't just another fluffy love story. This is about what happens when love collides with power, and the people who would rather burn everything down than see someone else happy. And hey, before we dive deeper, let me say this. If you love stories where love and revenge get tangled in the messiest, juiciest ways, don't forget to hit subscribe. These scripts take hours to write, edit, and emotionally recover from, so your support really keeps this channel alive. Now, let's start where every great downfall begins, with a mistake that didn't look like one, at least. Not at first. On paper, Adrian Wolf had it all. CEO of a rising tech firm, Forbes 40 under 40. The kind of man who could walk into a room and make investors loosen their wallets with just a handshake. He wore control like a perfectly tailored suit, crisp, impeccable, untouchable, but behind the polished speeches and the chauffeured car rides home was a quieter truth. Adrian Wolfe was lonely. He didn't talk about it, of course. Loneliness doesn't look good on our son. But the cracks were there in the way his penthouse apartment felt more like a hotel than a home, in the way he clutched his phone long after midnight, not for emails, but waiting for a text that would never come. And then there was Emily, his daughter. She was 9 years old, whip smart, with the kind of curious mind that could have been a gift if not for the shadow of her mother's absence. Her MOM had walked out 3 years earlier. And though Emily rarely spoke of it, the abandonment hung over her like invisible scaffolding. She smiled often, but it was thin. Her grades had slipped. Teachers mentioned attention issues, but Adrian knew better. She didn't need medication. She needed presence, something he couldn't always give. One night, after a brutal 12-hour day capped by a shareholder dinner, Adrian returned home to find Emily asleep at the dining table, her math workbook still open, pencil marks smudged by the side of her cheek. He stood there, briefcase dangling at his side, throat tightening, a multi-million-dollar empire under his command. And he couldn't even help his daughter finish her homework. That was the breaking point. The very next morning, Adrian told his assistant to find the best tutor money could buy, someone elite. Someone who could rebuild Emily's confidence, and if he was being honest, patch the guilt he carried. And because CEOs don't shop around themselves. The search was fast-tracked through a friend of a friend referral. Our sum landed on his desk, neatly formatted, credentials sparkling with Ivy League glass. Adrian didn't bother reading it twice. He signed the check. Problem solved. Or so he thought. The following Monday, the elevator chimed in his high-rise lobby. Adrian expected a sleek, buttoned-up 20-something with horn-rimmed glasses and an air of polished arrogance. Instead, he opened the door to her. She wasn't what he imagined. No sharp suit, no Ivy League vibe. Instead, she wore a cardigan that looked like it had survived a few too many wash cycles. Hair pulled into a loose bun that had lost the battle hours ago. And yet there was something in her eyes. Steady, warm, a little mischievous, even. "Hi," she said, adjusting the strap of her bag. "I'm here for Emily." Adrian blinked, trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the sum on his desk. "Yeah, the tutor?" Her smile tilted. "Last I checked. Now." Adrian Wolfe was not a man who tolerated mistakes. A wrong number, a misfiled contract, these things cost millions in his world. But for once, he hesitated. Maybe it was the fact that Emily, usually so shy, peeked out from behind him and instantly lit up at the sight of her. Maybe it was the way this woman crouched down, meeting Emily eye to eye instead of talking over her, like so many adults did. Whatever it was, Adrian didn't correct the mix-up. Not yet, and that, right there, was the moment his perfectly controlled life started to slip. Because this wasn't the tutor he hired. This wasn't part of the plan. And yet, as Emily tugged her toward the study room with giggles Adrian hadn't heard in months, he couldn't bring himself to stop it. Mistakes, after all, were supposed to be cleaned up immediately. But sometimes, the wrong hire isn't a mistake at all. Sometimes it's the beginning of everything. The woman's name was Claire. No fancy title. No string of degrees trailing after her last name. Just Claire. She wasn't the kind of tutor Adrian thought he'd hired. The sum on his desk promised precision. An Ivy League graduate who probably charged extra just to breathe the same air as her students. Detached, polished. The type you treat tutoring. Less like teaching and more like consulting. Claire was the Opposite, grounded, witty, and if you looked closely, carrying her own weight of invisible baggage. She never spoke much about her past, but there were hints. The careful way she listened before offering advice. The way her jokes sometimes had an edge. Like humor was both her weapon and her shield. And her clothes simple, functional, spoke of someone who had learned long ago that survival mattered more than appearances. Adrian noticed these things, though he pretended not to. But Emily noticed something else. She noticed that Claire didn't treat her like a problem to be solved. On that very first day, when Emily stumbled through multiplication tables, Claire didn't sigh or lecture. Instead, she leaned across the desk, grinned, and whispered, "Okay, so here's the secret they don't want you to know. Math is basically a magic trick. Wanna learn the cheat codes?" Emily's laughter rang out, bright and unrestrained. Adrian hadn't heard that sound in months, and for the first time, he wondered if this mistake was exactly what his daughter needed. Weeks passed. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. Emily sat straighter, spoke louder. Her school reports improved, but more than that. She smiled with her whole face again. The dark cloud of abandonment seemed to lift piece by piece. Every time Claire walked through the door, Adrian saw it. He felt it, and though he tried to remain professional, something inside him stirred. But of course, perfection never lasts. Not in Adrian Wolf's world. It started with whispers at the office. His assistant, ever loyal, hinted that certain board members didn't appreciate his choice of tutor. Too unpolished, too ordinary. One director even scoffed. Isn't he embarrassed to have his daughter taught by someone like that? Then came the relatives. His sister, polite but pointed, asked at brunch if Claire was qualified enough for Emily. She smiled as she said it, but the barb landed, and then the final blow, his ex-wife. She breezed back into town one weekend, hair perfect, perfume sharp enough to sting. After a clipped her low, she eyed Claire and sneered. "This is who you've got raising our daughter now." "You really downgraded, Adrian." Claire heard it. Adrian saw her jaw tighten, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she turned to Emily and said softly, "Why don't you show me that story you've been working on?" It was grace. It was dignity. And it burned him more than his ex-wife's venom ever could. Because here's the thing about Adrian Wolf. He thrived on control. He controlled boardrooms, markets, entire futures. But here, in his own home, control was slipping. Claire wasn't just tutoring his daughter. She was changing the balance of his carefully built life. And not everyone wanted change. So he faced a dilemma. Keep things exactly as they were, neat, sterile, respectable, or lean into the chaos this woman had brought into his home. It should have been an easy decision. CEOs choose logic, not emotion. But every time he tried to draw the line, he saw Emily's face, brighter, lighter, alive, and he knew logic didn't stand a chance. Still, doubt lingered. In quiet moments, Adrian caught himself asking questions he never thought he'd ask. Was he risking his reputation, his company, his control? Or was this the first time in years he was choosing something real? And that right there is where the storm truly began, because when you mix family, business, and matters of the heart, disaster isn't just possible, it's inevitable. Do you think mixing work and personal life is a recipe for disaster or destiny? It didn't take long for the whispers to start. At first, they were small. A raised eyebrow when Claire's name appeared on the security log. A snide remark about hiring from Craigslist that drifted across the boardroom table. Adrian brushed it off. He'd built his empire on thicker skin than that. But whispers have a way of growing teeth. By the second month, employees were trading gossip like stock tips. "She's not even certified," one executive muttered. Another laughed. Guess our CEO's standards drop at home. Their voices always loud when Adrian walked by. But he heard enough to know the narrative was shifting. And then family got involved. His sister, Rebecca, called one evening under the guise of checking in. Her voice was sweet, but her words carried poison. Adrian, don't you think Emily deserves the best? I mean, this Claire, she seems nice, but nice isn't enough. You're raising the next wolf. Appearances matter. He bit back his temper. She's a tutor, Rebecca. Nothing more. Millimeters, she hummed, unconvinced. Just be careful. People are watching. That was the problem, people were watching. Adrian kept telling himself, and everyone else, the same thing. She's just the tutor, a professional hire. Temporary, replaceable. The words tasted hollow every time he said them, but they were safer than the truth, because the truth was harder to admit. He noticed her. Not just the way Emily thrived under her guidance, but the way her laughter filled the silence of his home. The way she challenged him, unafraid to roll her eyes at his arrogance. One night, he caught himself replaying a moment, a quick brush of her hand against his as they reached for the same pencil. It was nothing. It was everything, and he hated himself for it. So he doubled down. Drew the line. Professional only. Detached. Controlled. But pressure has a way of breaking even the strongest lines. One Friday evening, Claire stayed late to help Emily with a science project. Adrian was still at the office when his phone buzzed, an email forwarded by his assistant. Subject line: concerns about your daughter's tutor. It wasn't anonymous. 3 board members had signed their names beneath a paragraph dripping with condescension. They accused Claire of lacking credentials, questioned her background, and implied without saying it outright that Adrian was crossing personal and professional boundaries when he got home that night. Claire was already gathering her things. I think it's better if I don't come back, she said quietly, eyes fixed on the strap of her bag. Emily's face crumpled. But why? You promised you'd help me finish. Claire forced a smile, crouching to hug her. You don't need me, sweetheart. You're brilliant. Don't ever forget that. Adrian froze in the doorway. For a man who negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking, he suddenly couldn't find words. His chest tightened as he realized something terrifying. He cared. Too much, Claire. His voice cracked, softer than he intended. Wait, she straightened, meeting his eyes. There was pain there, but also resolve. Adrian, I don't want to make trouble for you. People already think, let them think, he snapped, sharper than he meant. Her brows lifted, startled. For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them, heavy and unspoken. Emily clutched her father's sleeve, whispering, Don't let her go, Dad. And in that moment, Adrian knew losing her wasn't an option, but keeping her would come at a cost. The blow didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It came with a headline. Monday morning, Adrian's phone buzzed before dawn. A link. Anonymous sender. The article's title bled across the screen. CEO's daughter taught by fraud inside Wolf's reckless choices. His stomach dropped. The piece was vicious, grainy photos of Claire leaving his house. Some torn apart, credentials fact-checked into oblivion. They claimed she'd lied about degrees, forged references, even hinted at a criminal record. None of it true. But truth hardly mattered when scandal was this entertaining. BYATM. Board members were circling like vultures. We need a statement. This could tank investor confidence. Cut her loose, Adrian, before she drags you down. He listened, jaw tight, every word fueling the quiet storm inside him. Claire was collateral to them, disposable. To him, she was becoming the one thing he couldn't lose. The choice was clear, or it should be protect his image, distance himself, release a statement, fire her, move on. That's what the old Adrian would have done. The Adrian who played life like chess, always 10 moves ahead. Feelings buried under strategy, but feelings had a way of rewriting the rules that evening. He found Claire sitting on his back porch, hands clenched around a mug of tea gone cold. Her eyes were red, her shoulders trembling with the weight of humiliation. "I didn't do this," she whispered before he could even speak. "I swear, Adrian, I never lied to you." Or to Emily. He crouched down, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I know," she blinked. "But everyone else can burn." His voice was sharper than he intended, but he didn't take it back. Not this time. For once, Adrian Wolfe wasn't going to let the world dictate his choices. He started quietly, pulling strings, calling in feathers. If they wanted a war, he'd give them one, just not the kind they expected. First, he traced the leak, digital fingerprints, shell accounts, the kind of trail meant to stay hidden. But money leaves shadows, and Adrian knew where to shine the light. Within a week, the source came into focus, a rival executive, one who'd been circling his seat for years. Of course, next he secured Claire's name. He reached out to old colleagues, professors, even former students he tutored. Within days, he had a stack of glowing testimonies, ironclad proof of her honesty. Proof strong enough to silence most whispers. But silencing wasn't enough. Not this time. He wanted them to choke on the truth.so. He staged it carefully, a charity gala. Reporters hungry for sound bites, cameras flashing. He stood at the podium, delivered the speech they expected about market trends and corporate responsibility. Then, with perfect timing, he pivoted. "My daughter's tutor," he announced, voice calm, steady, deliberate, "was attacked by false accusations last week. I don't tolerate lies in business, and I won't tolerate them in my home. Claire is one of the most capable, honest people I've met, and if anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me." Gasps, murmurs, cameras clicking like gunfire, a declaration of war. Thinly disguised as loyalty, Claire had watched from the edge of the room, pale and trembling. When it was over, when the crowd dissolved into a storm of chatter, she pulled him aside. "Why would you do that?" Her voice shook. "You risked everything for me." He met her stare, every calculation stripped away. "Because some things are worth more than everything." The silence between them stretched, heavy with things neither dared say aloud, but the war didn't end there. "It never does." The rival executive doubled down, feeding tabloids, pressuring board members, painting Adrian as reckless, compromised, distracted by a woman. For weeks, the company swayed on the edge of scandal, stock prices trembling with every headline. Adrian fought back the only way he knew how, strategically, ruthlessly, but always with Claire in mind. He leaked proof of the rival's financial misdeeds, quietly convinced allies to turn on him. By the time the dust settled, the man was finished. A public resignation, a ruined reputation. Claire's name, finally, was cleared, but Adrian's, not so much. His board saw him as volatile now. Investors whispered about distraction, about weakness. Protecting her had come at a cost, exactly as he'd feared. And yet, watching Emily beam as Claire helped her with a school presentation, watching laughter fill the rooms that had once been silent as a tomb, he knew he wouldn't undo a single choice. Because here's the truth. The one even a CEO couldn't spin away. Power meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. And maybe that's the question for us, isn't it? If you had to choose between love and your career, which would you protect first? Pressure doesn't announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it creeps in like smoke, thin at first, then choking. For Claire, it had become unbearable. The whispers, the headlines, the side-eye glances every time she entered a room. She could handle people doubting her. But watching Adrian's name dragged into the mud, watching Emily's father attacked because of her was too much. Is her one night. She packed her bag. No fanfare, just quiet tears as she folded the life she'd built in that house into neat, invisible boxes. Emily caught her in the hallway. "Where are you going?" The little girl's voice cracked, small but sharp enough to stop her in her tracks. "Sweetheart," Claire whispered, crouching to meet her eyes. "I think I've stayed too long. I don't want to cause trouble for you and your dad." Emily's lip trembled. She shook her head with the kind of conviction only a child can summon. "But you're not trouble. You're the only one who listens. You're the only one who makes me feel normal." Her voice broke on the word. "Please don't go." Claire swallowed hard. "What do you say to that? When a child who's already been abandoned once looks at you like you're the last safe place in the world." Before she could answer, Adrian appeared in the doorway. He looked tired, suit jacket discarded, tie loosened, eyes shadowed with the weight of 1,000 battles. But what froze Claire wasn't the exhaustion. It was the raw fear in his gaze. Fear of losing her. "Don't," he said. "Just one word." But his voice cracked under it. "Don't leave, Adrian. You know I have to." She stood, trying to steady her breath. "This is ruining you. Your board hates me. Your investors are spooked. People are questioning your judgment because of me." He stepped closer, slow, deliberate. "You think I care about them? You should care." She shot back, anger laced with heartbreak. "This company is your life, and I'm just the mistake who walked into it for a moment." Silence stretched between them, thick, heavy, the kind that feels like standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for one wrong step to send you over. Then he exhaled, sharp and shaky. "You're not a mistake. God, Claire, don't you get it? You're the first thing in years that's felt real." Her breath caught. He pressed on, words tumbling past the walls he'd spent a lifetime building. "I've built empires. I've buried myself in work so I didn't have to feel. My marriage was a contract, not a connection. And then you showed up by accident, of all things, and suddenly I remembered what it's like to want something that isn't numbers on a page." Claire blinked fast, but the tears came anyway. "Adrian, no." His voice steadied, firm now, like a man who had decided the truth was worth the fall. "You're not just Emily's tutor. You're the person who made my daughter laugh again. You're the person who makes this house feel like a home instead of a mausoleum. And whether the world approves or not, I can't let you walk out that door." Her bag slipped from her hand, thudding softly against the floor. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She'd spent so long telling herself she didn't belong, that she was an intruder in his pristine, calculated world. But now, hearing him say it aloud that she wasn't just tolerated, she was wanted, it unraveled something inside her she hadn't even realized was wound so tight. Emily tapped her sleeve gently. "Stay," she whispered again, and Claire's resolve crumbled. "But here's the cruel truth. Confessions don't erase consequences." Yes, Adrian admitted the one thing he'd sworn never to let slip, that his heart, carefully caged for years, had found its match. But outside that room, the storm still raged. His board still doubted him. His rivals still circled. His ex-wife had begun whispering about custody, using Claire as ammunition. Love, it turned out, didn't make the world gentler. It made the stakes higher. Still, as Claire leaned into his arms, as Emily wrapped hers around both of them, Adrian realized something. He'd spent his whole life protecting his empire. But at that moment, the empire could burn for all he cared. What mattered was standing right there in his living room to people he hadn't planned for, hadn't calculated, hadn't seen coming. And that was the cliffhanger none of his board members, none of his enemies, none of his so-called allies could have predicted, because for Adrian Wolfe, Losing her wasn't just a risk. It was unthinkable. The storm broke in a boardroom. Fitting, isn't it? For months, whispers had been building half-truths and polished lies passed around like fine wine. But on that morning, Adrian Wolfe walked into the lion's den and decided he was done pretending. They expected him to apologize, to quietly distance himself from Claire, package her as a misstep, and move on. That was the script. He didn't follow it. One of the senior board members, a man who'd built his career on smug smirks and backroom deals, leaned back in his chair. Your distraction is costing us. Investors are nervous. The press is circling. This woman, whatever she is, has no place in your life if you expect to lead this company. Adrian's jaw tightened. He didn't snap. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "Her name is Claire, and she has more integrity in one conversation than most of you show in an entire fiscal year." The room shifted. Papers rustled. Eyebrows rose. Another voice cut in, softer but sharper. His ex-wife. Think of Emily. Do you really want our daughter exposed to this circus? Do you want her growing up watching her father torpedo everything he built for some tutor? That word hung in the air. Tutor. As if it meant disposable. Adrian leaned forward, his tone suddenly lethal in its calmness. Emily has already been exposed to disappointment. She watched her mother walk away. She watched her father bury himself in work. Claire is the first person who's made her feel safe again. If protecting that makes me look reckless in your eyes, so be it. That was the moment the power shifted. You could feel it. The boardroom wasn't used to him playing with emotion. They expected strategy, not conviction. And conviction is harder to argue with. I won't sacrifice my daughter's happiness for a quarterly report, he continued. And I won't sacrifice the one person who's been brave enough to stand by us while you've all sharpened your knives. If that costs me a title, fine. But you don't get to decide how I live my life. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Afterward. People called it reckless. Some whispered he'd regret it. But here's the thing. Adrian didn't look regretful. He looked lighter. For the first time in years. The chains of image and expectation had snapped Doherty home. Claire tried to argue. You didn't have to do that. You could lose everything. He shook his head. Everything I actually care about is standing in this room, and Emily, wise beyond her years, grinned through the tension. Does this mean we're like a real family now? Claire laughed, though her eyes brimmed with tears. I guess it does. They began setting boundaries that night. No more letting gossip dictate their choices. No more bending to appease people who never had their best interests at heart. Adrian made it clear to his board, to his ex-wife, to the world that his life wasn't a stage for their approval anymore. And Claire, she stopped shrinking under the weight of other people's doubts. She'd been called the wrong tutor, the wrong fit, the wrong choice. But in that house, with that man and his daughter, she finally felt right, of course. The world wouldn't quiet down overnight. Pressure doesn't vanish. It just changes shape. But the difference now was simple. They weren't fighting it alone, because when Adrian walked out of that boardroom, he didn't just defend her. He declared, without flinching, that some things love, loyalty, family were worth more than any empire. And that was their reckoning, not with anger, not with revenge, but with truth, sharpened into a weapon nobody saw coming. Time has a funny way of smoothing sharp edges. 6 months later, the chaos that once felt like it might swallow Adrian Wolfe whole had settled into something steady, almost ordinary. His company, though battered, hadn't collapsed. In fact, it had adapted. Investors who once side-eyed his every move now praised him for innovative leadership. The irony. His boldest, riskiest decision had nothing to do with the boardroom. It had everything to do with the woman who'd walked into his life by mistake, Claire wasn't just the tutor anymore. She was woven into the fabric of their lives in ways that went beyond lesson plans and report cards. Mornings in the Wharf household no longer started with rushed briefings and silent breakfasts. They began with Emily and Claire giggling over burnt pancakes, Adrian stumbling in half awake, pretending to be annoyed but secretly savoring the sound. Evenings weren't lonely echoes in a cavernous house. They were homework spread across the dining table, Claire telling stories that made Emily's eyes light up, Adrian watching quietly and realizing this chaos of crayons, laughter, and mismatched schedules was the kind of wealth no balance sheet could measure. One night, Emily curled up on the couch between them, her hair a tangle, her math workbook sliding to the floor. She looked at her father, then at Claire, and asked, with that blunt honesty only children possess, "Does this mean you're gonna marry her?" Adrian choked on his drink. Claire laughed, cheeks pink, and in that unfiltered moment, something unspoken clicked into place. They weren't a fractured trio fumbling through survival anymore. They were a family, but it hadn't come without scars. Claire still carried the sting of the rumors, the whispers that had tried to chase her out. Adrian still bore the weight of every choice, every confrontation that could cost him his empire. And yet, sitting there with his daughter asleep against Claire's shoulder, he realized something simple but profound. None of it mattered. Not the board's judgment, not the ex-wife's disapproval, not the headlines. What mattered was this peace. Hard-won, fragile, but theirs. One evening, long after Emily had gone to bed, Adrian finally put it into words. "You know," he said softly, pouring them both a glass of wine, "I used to think the worst thing I could do was make a mistake. That if I planned hard enough, worked long enough, I could keep my life airtight." Claire raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "And now," he handed her the glass, his gaze steady, "now I know the best thing that ever happened to me was hiring the wrong tutor." She laughed, shaking her head. "Not sure that's the kind of thing you should put on our son." He leaned closer, his voice warm with something deeper than humor. "Maybe not, but it's the kind of thing you build a life around." Looking back, he could admit it. Fate hadn't knocked politely on his door. It had barged in messy, inconvenient, unplanned. It had turned his polished world upside down, forced him to choose between control and connection. And thank God he'd chosen connection, because out of the chaos, something stronger had taken root. Not perfection, not fairy tale bliss, but love, the kind that survives boardroom battles, whispered betrayals, and the heavy weight of expectation, the kind that made Emily feel whole again, the kind that made a fortress of glass finally feel like home. And maybe that was the lesson all along. Sometimes fate doesn't knock. It barges in through the wrong door at the right time. And if you're brave enough to let it, it can turn your life, your love, and even your so-called mistakes into the best decision you ever made. And that, right there, was the twist no one saw coming. A single dad CEO, once convinced that control and caution were the only way to survive, found love and family in the very chaos he tried to avoid. A daughter who once felt abandoned finally had a home filled with laughter again. And the wrong hire, she became the anchor that held them all steady. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And maybe that's the kind of victory that matters most, not in the boardroom, not in the headlines, but in the quiet moments when you realize you're no longer alone. If you've been listening and thinking, "Wow, life really does have a way of flipping the script when you least expect it," you are not wrong. Sometimes fate doesn't come with a polite knock. Sometimes it barges in, throws your world off balance, and dares you to build something stronger in the wreckage. And Adrian, he proved that when you choose love over image, Family over fear, you don't just survive the storm. You come out of it with a life you never even dreamed was possible. So now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a wrong door, right time, moment in your own life? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to read your stories. And hey, if you enjoy messy, emotional tales where love, loyalty, and a little revenge collide, make sure to hit like, leave a comment, and subscribe. These scripts take hours to write, edit, and emotionally recover from. So your support keeps this channel alive. Until next time, stay sharp, stay kind, and never underestimate a so-called mistake.